Away from Torch Lake Village, we noticed that the hills become more significant, greater. The yacht club people speak about one big hill called Old Baldy, and sometimes it's bald and sometimes it isn't. It depends on if there are trees or not. But these hills were formed by one of the two processes that glaciers do forming hills. There are drumlins, as we mentioned before, and there also is the condition called a moraine. Now, the lateral moraine would be the material that's left along the sides of a glacier. The terminal moraine would be where the glacier has stopped for some period of time. The terminal moraine of the glacier that we're talking about is the Wisconsin Glacier, and we see that down at the end, well, let's see, where the strip bar is down by the end of the lake, just south of Round Lake, actually. There's a big sand pit, and that's a result of the that is the terminal moraine of the Port Huron Glacier. And that can be traced all the way down to Lake Michigan. And there's an inner and outer moraine because the glacier stopped several times. And in between the two moraines, water is trapped, and that there's a great area of potato growth over in that area because they have big wells. They have 12-inch wells over there, and they run these big sprinklers that travel around on wheels, and they actually irrigate a huge crop, and typically potatoes is one of them. So anyway, that particular process is what makes the hills. And Big Hill was one of those. Old Baldy is another that we see around there. These are names that people, principally from the yacht club, have given these as redoubles of sailing, and they use these hills as targets to where they're going to go or where they've been. And a sand dune is formed by sand being blown by the wind, and it actually, the sand drops after a while just because the wind no longer has enough strength. So as the wind brings the sand into the area, the sand will drop, and in many cases it will get polished. Each grain is polished, so the sand is pretty smooth. But the sand that has dropped doesn't get polished, so consequently it's a good indicator of how or when the sand actually was formed. And by going out and taking pieces of a sand dune, you can find out a lot about the time that was going on there. As a matter of fact, we have done some studies of that. Michigan State has university has done some studies, and they took cores of the sand dunes up in that area. And further north, they started up at Wilderness Park and came all the way down, and they went down as far as Elk Rapids. And they took cores, about a 1-inch core, and they put those into, wrapped them with aluminum foil so light wouldn't get to them, because there are chemicals in the sand that are affected by the light. So they could find out then just how long ago, how many years before present was this sand deposited there.